Hi everyone, welcome to week 2. This week we'll be going over market failures and government intervention. For this week's topic, we will be going over the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. Just to kind of give you some context, this was really talking about, what happened in the market, why did it fail, and what were the consequences, and how did the government address this crisis. So, market failure of 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. This was the subprime mortgage crisis, essentially. Banks were issuing out risky subprime mortgages to borrowers with poor credit, bundling them up into mortgage-backed securities, which led to widespread defaults. Unfortunately, because of this situation, it was very complex as far as, products like credit, default swaps, collateral debt obligations were poorly understood and unregulated, and it created a systematic risk, which was very detrimental to the market because everyone had a home mortgage loan. As far as what was the outcome from the market failure, major banks like Lehman Brothers collapsed, causing a chain of reaction in the global markets. Another thing was a wide mass, unemployment and economic constraints. Unemployment soared about 10%, and then the economy kind of basically tanked right after, as the market started to freeze and businesses were starting to shut down. To give you some context, I actually do remember this very specifically. I remember a lot of people had gotten laid off, and they were going through the market at that time. As why was it a market failure? Again, this comes back to the investors and the consumers. The lack of the knowledge going into these subprime mortgages and financial products, because they are very high risk, and if you're not aware of the risk and if you're not aware of what it is, it starts to become a big problem, just because then you're not knowing what you're signing, and you're now going to be basically in charge of this mortgage and liable to pay back to the loan. So negative externalities, as far as the financial crisis, widespread beyond the housing market, affecting the broader economy, millions of people globally. And then as far as what was the government's intervention? And when I say this, I'm not too sure if anyone is aware of this, but they had the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Actually, the government injected about $700 billion into the failing banks and financial institutions just to prevent a whole total collapse of all banks and markets. This was to essentially establish, stabilized financial systems and also restore confidence into banks. Second was the American Recovery Reinstatement Act. This had about 787 billion stimulus packages, which was implemented to create jobs, support state budgets, and promote economic recovery. This was just essentially to keep infrastructures and investments, and also direct aid to any individuals. Another act that was intervened from the government was Dodd-Frank Act. In 2010, the government passed the Dodd-Frank Act to regulate financial markets more tightly, limit the risk of taking, and also protect the consumers. I think something that was to be learned from this was that, be aware of what you're signing up for as far as when it comes to financial securities and all these other types of things, especially when it comes to mortgages, just because the goal overall was to prevent any financial crisis, in the future, but also increasing transparency between the consumer and the investor, and not to try to make any oversights, because you want to be aware of what you're liable as a consumer and as an investor. I think the financial crisis kind of illustrated the importance of government intervention, especially when the market fails unexpectedly or very dramatically. In this case, from 2008 to 2009, I think having an unchecked market activities kind of led to these consequences, and I think also it led to people not being knowledgeable in financial securities and understanding the market in itself. So By the government coming in very swiftly and taking action to stabilize the economy and prevent any further collapse and maybe prevent any future collapses, definitely helped in the future. I think this highlights, the delicacy between the balance between market freedom, but also needing regulations and protect the economy and society from the private. I think now that we're coming out of COVID, I think definitely in this type of market, we can kind of see from 2008, 2009 as, backup of why, when we're re-entering the market, especially when you're dealing with something that was frozen for so long, I think you have to understand, both sides and understand what you're going into, especially when it comes to the market, because again, history kind of essentially repeats itself, and I think we're seeing that again coming out of COVID, that we're all re-entering the market again, and we're watching the market with inflation, but also a high hike in pricing, and I think it's definitely something to be seen. We are seeing a little bit of a reverse because unlike having unemployment, essentially we had people that didn't really want to go back to work, and I think again that is somewhat detrimental to the economy and to the market, and it's all about how well we can pivot, but also ensure that the government is making guidelines and stabilizing the economy for each other in those senses, just to prevent any types of collapse like we've seen in 2008 and in 2009.